thank you all for joining today. I'm Trinity. I'm an assistant editor for the British Ecological Society. And just before we begin, I'd just like to note that this talk is being recorded and we'll be posting a video afterwards on our YouTube channel. A link will be sent out afterwards to all attendees. And if you have any questions during, please put them in the chat or wait to the end to ask your questions. And we'll also be putting in a code of conduct in the chat as well, just for reference. This talk is hosted by Applied Ecology Resources, which is the British Ecological Society's open access resource platform, where we have a collection of information sources to help progress our understanding and management of the natural world. And today for this live talk I'm very happy that we are joined with Dr. Lina Mühlbauer, who will be talking with us today about DIY sensors for high-resolution microclimate monitoring and going through her and her team's experiences with the lessons they've learned and the future direction of their research. So over to you, Dr. Mühlbauer.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I will talk about DIY sensors for high-resolution microclimate monitoring. And if you have any questions later on, you can reach me via my email address. I just finished my PhD, actually. This is a little side project of my PhD I will talk to you about today. And I will start for the first about 10 minutes talking about the sensors we built and about the actual project. Then I will talk a little bit about the lessons we learned and the problems we had, but also some solutions. And I will end with some other applications where we used similar kind of sensors, which will hopefully give you an idea where they can be used too, other than microclimate monitoring. And I'm already going to start with the sensors themselves. And I would like to start with a quick question. So I would like to know if you have ever used microcontrollers before. A microcontroller, for example, would be a Raspberry Pi, Arduino, or something like that. So you could scan the QR code with your phone, for example, and answer that question. I would be really interested in that. And I maybe would wait a few seconds to minutes if that is going to work out. Yes. Nice that you're here, that there's someone who had never used that before. That's really nice. I'm going to explain to you what a microcontroller actually is and how you can use them. And it's also nice that there are some people who used that before. That's super cool. So I'm happy that some people got interested into that. That's cool. Thank you for taking part in this. I will just already continue, I think. So the original project where we used this sensor was called Arduinos in the Wild, a novel low-cost sensor network for microclimate monitoring in remote ecosystems. And what you can see on the picture is an Arduino in the wild. And I worked on this project with a few colleagues from Finland, where we actually had the experiments where we used the sensors, with a colleague from Italy who was our technician and built the sensors with me. He's also on the picture, on the main picture. And some colleagues from the University of Graz, and especially my supervisor, Adam Clark. Why remote ecosystems? So we did that at the Kilpisjärvi Biological Station, which is in the northwestern part of Finland. So it's at the border between Sweden, Norway, and Finland. So it's really remote there. It's really a harsh climate. And there is an experimental site experimental station with 4 sites, which differ a lot actually in their vegetation and soil. So some of them are kind of shrubby and some of them is more heath. And I actually have another picture from the beautiful station where we did that. I was actually never there. So Giorgio, our technician, deployed the sensors with the colleagues from Finland. But I heard it's really, really beautiful. Why measuring microclimate? So this is an example from the Alps, which is my main study region, actually. And what you can see on the left is the black square. So that's a few square meters of an alpine meadow. And on the right, you can see the heat picture. And they're actually really big differences in climate of only these few square meters. And we are especially interested in microclimate as we are interested in the protecting effects of cryptogams on the soil temperature. And like you can think of, like cryptogams are really small, they're patchy, so it's really important to measure on small scales to see how this insulating effect actually works out. And that is also reflected in our experimental design. So what you can see on the right is one plot, and that's separated by two subplots. So we clipped the vegetative plants on one side. It's not really important for today, but to make sure that we only cover the cryptogamic effects. And then there's one environmental microcontroller unit on these plots, and we measure on the surface and in 5 centimeter depth. We measure temperature and soil moisture. And the plot itself is 25 centimeters by 50 centimeters. And the environmental microcontroller unit is where the Arduino, so where the brain is basically in. I will show you later on a more detailed plan of the microcontroller unit. So that is actually a picture of one environmental microcontroller unit, and several of these EMUs build the sensor network. And there's the picture shows a short overview, basically. So we have this box where the brain is in, so where the Arduino, the microcontroller is in, and then there are several sensors, moisture sensors, 10 moisture sensors, 10 temperature sensors, and additionally one sensor, which is the BWP sensor, which is a more expensive moisture sensor for comparison, which was developed by one of our co-authors. And that's the more detailed view on it. So in this case, there's the Arduino. So the Arduino is it's a microcontroller. It's like a little computer. It can run little programs. It also can save data. And all of these moisture and SCADA sensors are connected to this Arduino. It additionally has a real-time clock. That is important because if the battery runs empty, then the Arduino doesn't know anymore which time it is. So it needs a real-time clock, and the real-time clock has an own battery itself, so it always knows the time. Then, of course, we have a battery connector where you can put just a normal battery in there. And also we have a LoRa antenna. I will also talk about that later. But that enables several Arduinos to talk to each other. We have a more detailed view on that. So that is one of the temperature sensors. It actually comes like that. So it's ready sealed. They are still really cheap. You can buy them like that. Then we have the more expensive moisture sensor and also the cheaper moisture sensor. And that's already built like that. You just need to connect all of that to the Arduino. And that is actually one example, or that's one picture where the EMU is deployed in the field. So the little box is the EMU, and you can see the plots, they're really patchy. There's some mosses, some lichen, some shrubs. And the scissor is actually there for size comparison. So in total, we deployed 40 of these EMUs, and each of them has 10 soil temperature and 10 soil moisture sensors. So in total, 20 sensors. And now the important question is, because we always say it is cheap, but how much is it actually? So I would like you to guess how much is one of these units with 10 moisture and 10 temperature sensors. So we have this like a microcontroller in the middle, and we have the possibility to measure 10 moisture and 10 temperature points in time. And I would like you to guess, and maybe you can scan again the QR code and try to estimate how much one of these sensor units or one of these EMUs actually is. So one person. Thank you. Thank you for being so active. So I would actually solve that. No, is this still? For time reasons, I would stop that now. So you will really really, really cheap. It actually is a little bit more expensive. So one of these units is actually, so it's option number 2, it's between 50 and 100 euros. It is actually in total 91 euros. So that's a little list of all of the components, and it's of course only the components. It's not the work you need to do to get all of that together. But anyway, it enabled us that when we deployed these 40 EMUs, each 20 sensors, we had 800 unique measurement points for 3,600 euros, which is still super cheap, just a little bit more expensive than you expected. And this is really cheap, especially in comparison, probably most of you know that, to these sensors. There's several kinds of sensors you can buy from companies. And we performed some tests. So we used the TDR soil moisture probe, which is 2 manually probe soil moisture, which costs about 5,000 euros. And the other comparison we performed was an iButton. So you probably also know them. So that is for soil temperature measurement, but only for one soil temperature point measurement, and it's about 100 euros. So you can imagine it would be much, much more expensive to perform the same kind of measurements just with these kinds of sensors. And now we already reached where I will show you some results. So what you can see over there is we compared on the y-axis the iButton temperature measurement. So we had, not in all plots, but in most of the plots, we had iButtons. iButtons. And on the x-axis, there's the Arduino soil temperature measurements. And you can already see that also the dashed line is the one-to-one line, and the blue dotted line are the deep measurements, and the red lines are the surface measurements. And so most of the points fall actually to the one-to-one line. So the temperature measurements are actually pretty good. What you can see on the right is the soil temperature against day of year. So it's basically a time series of the temperatures, and you can see that it is a pretty, it makes some sense. You have a pretty normal time series of temperature. And in total, we were able to collect over 1 million unique temperature records. The same is true for the soil moisture. So what you can see on the x-axis is the soil moisture sensor prediction. So they are capacity sensors, so they don't give you actually percentage water content or something like this. We need to predict them from calibrating them. And in comparison, the TDR, so the manually probed soil moisture. And what you can see over there, there are big differences between the sites. It's because of the vegetation and the soil, which really differs. And also there's much more noise in it. So that has several reasons, but it's probably just because soil moisture sensors are not that good. And you can, again, you can see there the soil moisture percentage against the day of year. So that's also time series. And these little dots is the TDR probe measurements, because of course our technician didn't measure like every 10 minutes. He needed to go there manually probe the soil. But with less precision, but we still managed to collect over 1 million unique soil moisture records. And to answer that question, if it's worth it to measure microclimate, the exact numbers doesn't really matter, but the R squared we will look at, so that's soil temperature and soil moisture R squared, so the fit of the comparison between the more expensive sensors and our sensors. And what you can see for the soil temperature, that's 97%, that's pretty good. And the soil moisture precision is much less precise. And but what is really important here for the microclimate is that over 10% of the variation comes from within plot variation. So that is kind of a lot, between a 25 to 50 centimeter square. That was our sensor network. I will now continue to talk about some lessons we learned from that. We faced a lot of problems actually. So we started that project in 2021. And first COVID hit it, and also then the Russian invasion. So there was a worldwide computer chip shortage. This project was actually first based on Raspberries. Then we needed to use Arduinos because there were no Raspberry Pis available. But yeah, we then solved that. We had during the experiment a high failure of real-time clocks because we bought the really, really cheap ones. And there are some more expensive ones. More expensive means 4 euros instead of 2. And that it's probably worth it because they are really important. We were able to figure that out because we could match the timestamps from the I buttons to the Arduino measurements. And also it rains a lot in northern Finland in summer, and our containers were not really waterproof. We also had storage device problems, so the SD card readers we had for some of our EMUs didn't work, so they couldn't save some of the data, but they are still able to save themselves without an SD card, so we could retrieve all the data. And the soil moisture sensor quality, like you saw before, is not super good. So if you are really interested in measuring precise soil moisture, you need to think carefully about that. But which is pretty cool. Like these containers were flooded, the Arduinos were like sitting in water, but still only one of these 40 EMUs failed completely. So these Arduinos are really durable. That is super cool. Yeah, then sensor network. Sensor network actually doesn't mean only one microcontroller unit, but a network of these sensors. And what we actually did is we had 40 of these measurement units and also 10 nodes where the data of these EMUs was collected to. And then we had the idea that these nodes sent their data to a LoRa antenna, which is connected to the internet. And we wanted to use the long range wide area network, LoRa it's called. That's why they have these LoRa antennas. But it turns out that it's long range, but it's not enough for northern Finland. So there is no LoRa antenna close enough that is actually connected to the internet. So what we did instead, we let the EMUs talk to the nodes so that our technician didn't need to go to each of these EMU, but only to these 10 nodes to collect the data. But there is in our publication, there is the manual for doing all of that. So you should be able to copy that basically. And of course, to the containers, it's like there are people that invented better stuff than we did, and they're actually DIY solutions to build containers that are even completely waterproof, so that you could use a similar kind of system underwater. And the most important part maybe is that it is a lot of fun. You can learn a lot. I got really into electronics during that, but you need a lot of time. It is super time consuming to build these sensors. And if you have the time and if you don't have a lot of money like we, then it's probably worth it. Yeah, and then we already reached the last part, and I will quickly show you some examples where we use similar kind of approaches in other experiments. So what I did during my PhD, which was one of my last projects, is I measured NDVI with these kind of sensors. So this EMU is basically based on a Raspberry Pi, but it works similar. So it has these temperature and moisture sensors. But additionally, it has a camera with an AER cut filter attached. So you are able to take pictures from the greenhouse experiment, from the plots. That's how it looks like in the greenhouse. And then you can calculate NDVI. So I got a really nice time series with NDVI measurements every 10 minutes. And that's how one of these pictures look. So you can see the camera is not super good, but it's good enough to even identify like single plants if you would want to. So that's a super cool approach. We also use them for teaching. So we use them with students, bachelor students, but also with school children. And we built this light intensity sensor, which is really easy to build. So it takes a few minutes to half an hour maybe for younger children. It's easy electronics, and you can measure light intensity under vegetation in the greenhouse. And that's a lot of fun. And we do that every year. And like the students really like that. And I would like to quickly mention also there are really endless possibilities. So there are readily built sensors you can attach to an Arduino, to a Raspberry Pi. There's free code available everywhere. So you could build whatever you would want to build. And it's sometimes really worth it. Just because it's so cheap and also because it's so flexible. And one additional advantage is really that you can use that over and over again. So you can always detach the sensors from the Arduino and use it for another project. That's pretty cool. So half of the Finland project material I used also for the greenhouse stuff. So that's pretty cool. So most of that parts you only need to buy once. That is really nice. Yeah, and I would actually like to end with the word cloud. So if you could take part one last time, and I would just like to collect what you can imagine to use some kind of these sensors for, that just that all of us can get an idea or maybe inspiration. I would really like that. If some of you have an idea, and I would just leave it open for maybe 2 minutes, and then I'm also at the end, and we can then after that start with questions. Oh, that's super cool stuff. And there's also I think by now a broad range of literature from like camera traps and all of that stuff where these kind of sensors are used. And yeah, someone wrote providing more microclimates. And I actually wrote something about it in a blog post about the publication, I think, because I always like the idea that you can measure microclimate, but also give insects and plants and whatever more microclimates and actually use that for nature conservation because it's also so accessible and so cheap. Yeah, thank you so much for these pretty cool ideas. I will stop that now. We can still later look on that, but I think you can't write on it if I go on. Yeah, so that's actually my last slide. So there's this method paper. We really took care that the supplement is pretty good. So if you want to build that sensor network, you should be able to build that. Otherwise, just write me an email because there are pictures in it, what you need to connect where. So even if you don't have a lot of knowledge before, just try. It's fun. I wrote a blog post, which is about some more application stuff. And also the code is freely available for the EMUs on the GitHub of my supervisor. And you actually can also scan the QR code and should get all of the links for that. Yeah, thank you so much for joining and for the interest. I'm really happy that so many people are interested in that. And I would quickly like to thank my co-authors on this and for the invitation, of course. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lina. Yeah, it's great to get your first-hand experience. And if anyone has any questions, if whether or not you would like to write them in the chat or if you'd like to raise your hand and unmute yourself, please feel free. And wait a few seconds. Any questions? No worries if you can't think of any right now. We will, as Lina mentioned, we will be, oh, yes, we do actually have one. We do. Thank you. So we have a question. How far can you make the sensors reach? Right, you're muted. Sorry?
So what do you mean by how far? Like how far the sensors can reach from the microcontroller, or like how far they can be from each other? Because like the temperature sensor, for example, they have a really long cable. I think it's 1 meter actually, so they can reach far from each other. And yeah, yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so that depends a lot on the sensor, but you can always like elongate the cable, of course. I think there's no limit actually to that. You just need to cut it, connect the cable, and then you can have what distance you ever like.
Hmm. Okay, great. Does anyone have any other questions as well? Okay, there are a few comments as well. I'm sure Lina's reading them as well. But yeah. Oh, another one. Okay. Okay, sorry, let me just get it up. Okay, so we'll go first. How does the LoRa LoRa system work, and how is the batteries last? How long do they last for?
Yeah, so the LoRa system is basically it's similar to like network connection. It has antennas and it works via these antennas. Um, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. And that the advantage is that the battery lasts really long of that, because if you would use Wi-Fi or network connection, that takes a lot of battery, but the LoRa system is actually very good for that. And one other advantage is that the LoRa system is even there where there's no network connection, mostly because it has these very long ranges. So you cannot send a lot of data, but over a long range and for not many battery cost. Yeah.
Mhm. And then there's a second part to that question as well. I thought sensors have limited distance cause of the voltage supplies.
Yeah, that is true. So there is probably a limit somewhere. But I think, for example, if you have one temperature sensors on that, I mean, I don't think you could have them like 10 meters long, but I think there's a long range in between where they still would work. But it's probably something where you would need to test it. But also, like we were told that 10 temperature sensors and 10 moisture sensors on one Arduino is too much because of voltage supply, but it also worked out. So I would say it's worth a try.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. And where would you buy the sensors?
So you can buy these sensors basically on Amazon. You can buy them everywhere where you can buy electronics. Everywhere. Yeah. You can also buy them directly on the Arduino page if you want the original ones. Yeah.
And then we have one. How did each EMU communicate with the node, and what is the node made of?
Yeah, so the emus actually communicate via LoRa with the nodes. And the node is similar, that's also an Arduino, but it has an SD card reader and an SD card on it, so it can collect the data and also store the data, but it's the same system. So you have an Arduino, there's an SD card attached to it, it has a LoRa antenna, and that's how they communicate. So also the code for that is actually in the paper.
Okay. Great. And then what are your waterproof strategies?
Yeah, so what we actually did, so these boxes, you can buy them also like they are used for no, I don't know. So you can buy them if you have in the garden electricity and you want to have that in there. So they have these like plastic cups, and we just sealed those plastic cups where the cables come out. We just sealed them with heat glue, and that didn't work. So that was a bad strategy. Um, but like the example I showed in the presentation, I think they actually use these rubber bands and they have real sealing, so that should work out. But don't copy our system if you study rainfall. That's probably not gonna work. Yeah.
Okay, are there any more questions? Can wait a few more seconds. Yeah. How do you calibrate your soil moisture?
Yeah, so we So these TDR probes also with like the capacity, you need to have your soil type, and then you just need to weight the water you put in there, and then you measure the capacity, and then you get a calibration curve. That's yeah, it's a junction box actually. Yeah, right. That's yeah. Someone wrote that the box we used is a junction box. That's the right word. Yeah. So that's how you calibrate this moisture, and that's just the same way you need to calibrate all soil moisture sensors, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Are there any more questions? Yeah, as mentioned, we'll be linking all of Lina's contact details as a follow-up. So if you do have any more that pop up, please do not hesitate to contact her or us, and we can pass the questions on as well. Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for joining. As Lina mentioned, we do have her paper. It's currently in our special feature Innovations in Practice with our journal Ecological Solutions and Evidence. If you want to follow that QR code, you will see the special feature and Lina's article, as well as all the other ones in that feature if you would like to take a look. But yes, thank you all so much for joining today. It's been a great conversation, and thank you again, Lina. And yeah, if stay tuned, we will be having more AER lives in the future. And yes, thank you all so much for joining.